Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-bum. Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Kenneth Hahn with Ask the Rabbi Thursdays. And tonight I'm talking about seeing the election of Donald Trump through a Jewish lens. Why am I talking about this? At some level, I really don't want to, and I actually have some trepidation talking about this because I don't know to whom I'm speaking, and I'd rather not offend people. But I'm talking about this question because it's the question people have been asking me lately, a lot of people. And furthermore, I was speaking this afternoon with my 18-year-old daughter and her friend, and they're quite despondent at this point and despairing. And so, just to get things right out front, they're despondent because they're very upset that Donald Trump won the election. And I have to confess, I'm not thrilled about it myself. I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is a bastion of progressivism. But I want to talk about the response to this election, not from the standpoint of Democrats and Republicans, but rather what we can learn from our Jewish traditions and seeing the election through this lens. And I'm saying it's through a Jewish lens, not the Jewish lens, because, Harry Truman said there are three kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics. And, we will all make meaning out of anything that's out there that is consistent with the meaning we want to give to something. And, we're seeing that now with facts and alternative facts and so on and so forth. So, there seems to be a pressing need to address this question among people in my community, so I'm addressing it here this evening. So I want to start by actually going back to our sacred texts and look at the Torah. But I want to look at it, we may come to this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion, in a little bit. But I want to look at the meta-narrative of the Torah as I understand it. And here's what I see when I look at the meta-narrative of the Torah. The Jewish creation myth, or story, has us living in the Garden of Eden in a state of grace. And through the acquisition of knowledge, we become self-aware, and there's a fall from grace. And the rest of the Torah is our attempt to find that state of grace once more. What's interesting for me is while Judaism addresses what one might do to get back to a state of grace at a variety of levels, including the individual level, much of Judaism and much of the Torah is really about the articulation of the creation of a just society. So it's really about our getting back to the promised land as a community. And much of Judaism is really taken up with ethics and how we interact with each other. And I'm going to have my dog stop scratching right now. So that's what we spend a lot of time with. And so Judaism is really concerned, among many other things, but I will say primarily concerned, perhaps, with the relationships between people and how those are managed. What about the role of leaders? Well, it's interesting. In the Torah, we quite recently have had the examples of two different leaders who occupied the same position, two different pharaohs. And before I get to that, I just want to say, quoting from Pirkei Avot, or the sayings of our sages, of our fathers, but of our sages, I wanted to quote Ben Zoma, who talked about who is wise. Who is wise, he says, the one who learns from every person. Who is brave? The one who subdues his or her negative inclination. Who is rich? The one who appreciates what he or she has. Who is honored? The one who gives honor to others. So that's one of our great sages talking about how we should act. And that applies ever so much more to our leaders. So when we look in the Torah at the two pharaohs who are juxtaposed with one another, the Pharaoh of Joseph and the Pharaoh of Moses, we see very, very different kings. And I want to thank Rabbi David Seidenberg for his analysis of this. The Pharaoh of Joseph is a man who understands that he doesn't know everything. And he looks to help in the form of Joseph, first to understand what's going on, then to propose a solution, and recognizing that Joseph would be better than he to implement the solution, he actually makes Joseph his right-hand man, if you will. And they have great success transforming Egyptian society and culture into an agricultural endeavor that can feed people during times of feast and times of famine. The Pharaoh of Moses, who comes thereafter, is a very different man. He looks out on his kingdom and he sees Israelites living among his people, and he worries that these people could someday potentially align themselves with a foreign enemy and fight against the Egyptian people themselves. And so he first has them enslaved and then, of course, orders the killing of the firstborn males. And, one thing leads to another, and we find ourselves currently with the 10 plagues. So there's this juxtaposition of these two leaders, one of whom is clearly a wise man and a just man, and the other who is neither of the above. So our tradition basically suggests more still about what we are to do in the case of the latter, where we encounter a leader who is unjust and is even dangerous to us. And it suggests a variety of different ways that we can approach the situation. Resistance is clearly called for. And we see different kinds of examples of resistance in the Torah portions that we have just read and are reading right now. So last week we saw in the wake of the Pharaoh's declaration that the firstborn males of the Israelites would be killed, the two midwives, Shifra and Puah, decide on their own, very quietly, to resist the order, and they refuse to carry out the order. We see Moses' sister Miriam, when Moses is born, through cleverness, find a way to save her brother's life, and indeed arrange for him to end up in the palace of the Pharaoh. So cleverness, quiet resistance, and of course we see very loud and outright resistance by Moses as he and his brother Aaron take Pharaoh head on against all odds, really, but with the force of will and the power of God behind them. I want to talk a little bit about Moses' story, because I think it can be actually quite informative for all of us. My daughter was despairing earlier today because she was sitting at the kitchen table not knowing what to do. And Moses can provide an example. What does he do? Initially, he actually, in a peak of rage, kills a taskmaster. And when he learns that he is basically going to be found out, he flees. And he goes to the land of Midian, and he ends up marrying Zipporah. And not parenthetically, they have a child, a son, and he names his son Gershom, after Ger meaning stranger, foreigner, because he said, I was a foreigner, or I was a stranger in a strange land, and I understand that experience very well. So he actually names his son after that experience and recognition. But what does Moses do? He becomes a shepherd, a pastoralist, and he's out grazing his sheep one night on Mount Horeb, and he encounters the burning bush. We just read about that last week. And of course, the burning bush is God's telling Moses that he has to go and speak for his people and begin the work of getting the Israelites freed from the bondage of Egypt. And he doesn't want the job. The first thing he says is, "Who am I to do this?" And he goes on to say, "I can't do this. I have a speech impediment. I'm not worthy of this task." And he's afraid. And we'll all be afraid. But we have to carry on nonetheless. And so I think what's really called for here is each of us, my daughter included, going to some quiet, still place and allowing our own burning bush to appear with some deep knowingness about what our response needs to be to this situation. And then, in spite of all the reasons not to do it, the fear, the belief that we're not capable, doing it anyway. Now, who should do what? Again, I said I don't want to go into being a Democrat or a Republican here. I think what our tradition says is whenever we encounter injustice, because we are a people whose path towards redemption and returning to a state of grace is based on creating a just society, when we believe that we are experiencing injustice, whether it's with our neighbor or our leader, it's incumbent upon us to take some kind of action. And that means if you didn't want Donald Trump to be the president, then you need to get busy. But it also means if you did want Donald Trump to be president, understanding that even your person will from time to time do things that you may perceive as wrong or unjust. And when that happens, it would be incumbent upon you to say something about it, do something about it. I supported Barack Obama for much of his presidency. It does not mean that I agreed with him all the time and supported him in every instance. And I was more than happy to speak out about it when I didn't appreciate what he was doing or saying. So I think we all need to do that to varying degrees, depending on how disturbed we are just now. But it is part of our tradition. I'll close returning again to Pirkei Avot, to one of our other great sages, Rabbi Tarfon, who said, "It is not incumbent upon us to complete the work, but neither can we desist from it." And with that, I'll say, Erev Tov. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Please tune in again next Monday for Music Mondays. And if you appreciated this post, by all means, share it with your friends or repost it. Thanks so much. Lehitraot.